Okay. So this is going to be probably a little bit of a shorter session with you guys. I'm going to assign a video at the end for you to watch in preparation for our next meeting on Thursday. So look out for that. Okay, so last week we were wrapping up sort of a section on hypothesis testing. I had used infanticide, that is males killing offspring. I'm just flipping through some of these slides to remind you what that was. And you remember watching the rather tragic video of the lions killing all of the cubs once those males took over that pride. Well, I should say took over the territory of that pride. So I just want to go through it again. I mean, in a sense, like briefly, I just sort of remind you of sort of the process of hypothesis testing, how we make predictions, and how in animal behavior we have to think about our hypotheses in terms of the various levels of hypothesis testing that I indicated to you before. So just to make the point, these are the set of hypotheses that were assessed with respect to the lion example of male infanticide. I just want to make the point that these hypotheses are related to sort of that fitness consequence aspect of hypothesis testing. So you remember we were talking about the sort of Tinbergen's 4 levels of hypotheses. These hypotheses that we're testing here are within the level associated with, sort of the fitness consequences, rather than associated with, mechanism. So if you were interested in like sort of the underlying mechanism behind, how or why infanticide occurs, you may, have questions about how do males recognize, infants, I guess, or young animals. How you could ask about ontogeny, right? You could ask about, are younger lions more likely to commit infanticide versus older lions? You could ask questions about the evolution of this behavior in terms of other cats. Do we see evidence of infanticide in related animals, like related social carnivores, for example? Those are different questions, different levels of questions, different levels of hypotheses compared to the one that we're asking here, which is about, what are the fitness consequences of this? Is this an adaptive behavior? And so to do that, we are asking questions about, or at least I should say the hypotheses are related to reproduction. So we had 4 hypotheses. One was that males were killing off offspring in order to prevent starvation of the group. That is, that if food is limited, then perhaps you might argue, if you're using a group selectionist argument, which we know is flawed, but if you could make the argument that males are killing off offspring or infants because they are trying to prevent limited food for the group. Other hypothesis was social pathology due to crowding. So this would argue that these lions are at high densities, have this kind of social behavior, and it's pathological. That means it's maladaptive. And then a feeding strategy. Maybe these males are killing these offspring or these infants, these cubs, because they are hungry and they want to eat them. Or they are killing the cubs because this will enhance their reproductive opportunities. And of course, we walked through all of these. We through observation, we know that, these are a series of predictions that we would expect, and I guess we've put a red line through them already. But if we were to make predictions about the behavior of infanticide at high and low densities, then if the pathology hypothesis and the idea of like the food limiting hypothesis would indicate, or that would predict that at high densities, we would expect to see a higher occurrence of infanticide. Whereas we would expect to see similar rates of infanticide if the males were feeding on the cubs, or if they were killing the cubs, if killing the cubs was part of a strategy to induce ovulation in the mothers. And we know based on observation that at high densities, we don't see infanticide more often than at low densities. So that is that infanticide is independent of population density, which suggests that this, food limiting and pathological behavior sort of hypotheses are not valid. That is, that we can reject them. And of course, I mentions the langurs here. The langurs were those monkeys that also have a similar social system as lions, and where males also engage in the in infanticide in a similar way. So if we were to look then just at the remaining hypotheses and their predictions, we have a few different components that we can examine. One is the timing of infanticide. When does infanticide happen? Do the males feed on the young, and do the males sire new young after they've eaten those cubs? And so if it's a feeding, if the reason behind the infanticide behavior is that the males are hungry and they're eating those kids, eating the cubs, then we would expect them, yes, to eat the cubs, and that this kind of behavior would happen soon after the takeover of the pride. If it's for reproduction, we would not expect to see the males feeding on the cubs, again, soon after takeover, and we would expect to see males siring new offspring, whereas in the previous hypothesis, we would not predict that males would be siring new young. And of course, we know, and I've already alluded to this, that males do not eat those cubs that they kill. And in fact, it's quite clear that the males are killing the cubs because that spurs the females to become receptive. And therefore, those new males, the males that have taken over the pride, they are able to sire their own cubs. And the imperative behind this is that the males can only hang on to these prides for about 2 years. It takes a female lion about 2 years to raise her cubs to independence completely. And therefore, if the males were to wait, imagine if there were some males that waited and did not engage in infanticide, then they would have to sit there and wait and defend the territory, waiting for those females to complete raising their offspring, and then cycle back and become receptive. And during that time, those males are at risk for losing control of that pride. I mean, when I say control, what I mean is that they control the territory, and they would necessarily then mate with the females. But if the females are raising cubs that are not theirs, I mean, whether they're theirs or not is irrelevant, I guess, in some ways. But the point is that if the females at the time of takeover are raising cubs, that means that they're not available for mating, and therefore those males are not going to be able to reproduce. Now, if you have some males that don't engage in infanticide and some that do, imagine how that's going to turn out, right? So the males that do engage in infanticide are going to have a reproductive advantage, right? Because they're going to go in, they're going to kill those cubs, and then those females will immediately become, well, not immediately, but in fairly short order, they will become receptive, and they will mate with the males that have taken over the pride. Whereas if they were males that waited, right, they'd be waiting and waiting, and in fact, they risk losing the territory because without actually reproducing. We know, like as I mentioned, that the males can only hang on to those prides, and it's called here, male tenure. They can only hang on to those prides for an average of about 2 years. And so they're only hanging on for a fairly short period of time, and it's in their reproductive best interests to begin to reproduce as quickly as possible. All right. Now, I mean, I've sort of portrayed this like the males are sort of in control, and in some respects they are. But I think I gave you that paper that showed that females actually have some fairly sophisticated strategies that they've evolved to try to prevent males from killing their cubs. Because from the female's perspective, of course, it's a cost, right? She's losing those offspring that she's invested, quite a bit of energy into. And so there is, natural selection should favor females to resist this, the infanticide that's being imposed upon them by the males. Okay, so yes, we know. Now, the interesting thing is that we have other examples from a variety of different taxonomic groups that uphold this kind of hypothesis, that is, that support it. The idea that, that infanticide is an adaptive reproductive strategy. So here's some examples. So these are spiders. Now we can call them infanticidal spiders, but they kill at the egg stage, at the sort of the fertilized egg stage. But females of this species in particular, they will mate once, and then they, as I've written here, they guard a single egg sac until the females die. So that is that the females only reproduce once, right? Now, what's interesting is that the males, if they are able to destroy the egg sac, that is that they destroy the egg sac that's been sired by another male, then that female will actually mate again with the male that destroyed the egg sac. So males can run around and, they'll mate with a female, for example, and that female will lay her eggs, fertilized eggs, and another male can come along, destroy those eggs, and then the female will mate again. So there's a male strategy which is akin to what we see in lions. That is that you can induce female reproduction by destroying the eggs that were sired by a rival male, right? So it's the same kind of logic as the hypothesis related to the lions. These are water bugs. So this is interesting because there's a sex role reversal here. So in this case, it's the males that engage in parental care. That is that they guard the eggs. In this case, you see these are, sometimes they're called toe biters. These are large water bugs or water beetles, sometimes they're called. And on the right in this photo, these are eggs that are on the back of this male. And so the female lays her eggs on the male after they've been fertilized, and the male is in charge of guarding them. I mean, in charge. The male is tasked with guarding these eggs. And in this case, so these are the males. In this case, it's the females that will run around and try to destroy these eggs, right? The eggs of other rival females, to try to, get this male to care for her eggs. So whether it's with respect to, beetles that lay their eggs on the backs of the males, or there are other species in the same group where the females lay eggs in a specific spot, and the males will brood them. That is, the males will guard them. And I've got a paper. Here we go. So this is just a paper related to, it's about a giant water bug, and it talks about how males, in the same way that I had the paper about female counter strategies to infanticide, this is a similar paper, but it's about these water bugs, and it's about how males have evolved counter strategies against infanticide by female water bugs. Okay, I'm not going to read it through for you, but there's some photos and shows you, and it's actually a relatively easy study to read, so it might be worthwhile if you'd like to go through that. There's another example of sex role reversal, are these jacanas. So jacanas are interesting. They are a tropical bird, and they are what we call sex role reversed. That is that it's the males are the ones that brood the eggs and care for the chicks rather than the females. The females often have a territory that includes multiple males. So It's not the same thing as a pride per se, because the males themselves do not live in like a group, but the female has a territory in which, in that territory, there are multiple nests that are guarded and by males. And that is that those males are there brooding and caring for the eggs that the female has laid in those nests. And the females will in fact take over territories. And when they do take over territories, the first thing that they do is run around and stomp and destroy the eggs that are in the nests of all the males, because those eggs are not hers. So she will then lay eggs in those nests, and those males that she's just taken over the territory, those males that she's just sort of taken over, quote unquote, will then begin to brood and care for her eggs and her chicks. Okay, so that gives you a sense that, that there is broad support in, many of these groups related to infanticide, whether it's male or female induced infanticide, but there is support for what is called the reproductive opportunities hypothesis. And in this case, in these kinds of examples, infanticide is an adaptive behavior that enhances the reproductive output and the fitness, the Darwinian fitness, we could say, of the animals, the individuals that are performing that behavior. Okay, any questions from that? No? Okay, it's rather gruesome, and perhaps we should be thankful that humans don't generally behave like this. Okay, here's another sort of set of another example with which we can test some hypotheses. And this is a little bit more complicated. This is a type of, I'm going to call it, it's like a katydid. They're a series of, they're crickets. They belong to a group called the Haglidae. And this is an evolutionary tree, and I'm not going to test you on this, so don't worry about that. But this is an evolutionary tree of crickets and their relatives. Okay, you can see there are true crickets here. Then there's a series of other groups of crickets and katydids. The tree and giant weta are an interesting animal. You should Google that thing, and that'll be an interesting thing. But anyway, all to say that this group, the Haglidae, are a group of, they're called ambidextrous and hump-winged crickets. But there's a couple of species here that engage in a very interesting behavior, and they have a structure called a gin trap. Now, I don't know why it's called a gin trap, but basically what it is, and I'll show you in a second, but the male has like a, I don't know how to describe it, but basically it's like a trap. It's like it's a part of their anatomy that like will clamp shut and hang on to the female when they're mating. So here we are. This is, in this case, we're talking about a species called Cyphoderus strepitans. It lives in the United States. In this case, I think this study is around Wyoming. They live in these meadows. They're nocturnal, so they're running around at night. And the males sing from a perch, and the female will then choose the male and mount him at mating. So the female sort of jumps on top of the male. So that's what it kind of, this is, avert your eyes, I suppose. This is what it looks like. This is a sex between a female and a male of this species, strepitans. So you can see the female and the male on below. So the female is mounting the male. And the interesting thing is that the male provides two costly food gifts. The first is that the female, there are a set of hind wings, and I'm going to show you some video in a second. There's video, I put it on the D2L as well for you to download if you want. But the male has these wings that are modified that the female can feed upon during mating. So while the female is on top of the male, she can feed on these hind wings. And the tissue and the hemolymph, hemolymph is like the equivalent of blood in insects. So the hemolymph and tissue then are a benefit to the female. And the male, is dealing with this female chewing off some of these modified wings. Now, this is a non-renewable resource. Okay, what I mean by that is that it's the male cannot grow those wings back. And so, and I'm not going to, well, here, look, there's a paper here that shows you that virgin males have an advantage because virgin males have these intact wings. So females prefer to mate with virgin males because those males have the intact wings and they're therefore, there's more food for the female while she's mating. I mean, why wouldn't you? So would you like, I won't go down that road. But all to say that this is a non-renewable food gift that the males can provide. Males can mate more than once. It's just that the ones that have mated more than once are not as attractive to females because they can no longer provide, the hemolymph and tissue from these modified hind wings if they're completely consumed. Now, there's another gift that the male gives, which is, I'm going to show you a video in a second. He also provides a protein mass, okay, or what's called a spermatophylax. This is attached to a sperm package, and the male makes a new one for each mating. And so it's a food gift that the female takes in that nourishes her and the offspring. Okay, I'm just going to show you some video here. And, I guess it's sort of cricket sex, which is perhaps alarming, but just be patient here while I navigate this. And we can see which one is going to be the watch. All right. All right, can you guys see that? If you could just let me know in the chat. Yeah, okay. Yep. So this is, these are these sort of crickets, I'll call them. And, you see the male presenting these wings for the female to eat, right? And he's trying to entice the female to lock in, to jump on top, and mate with him while she feeds on these wings. All right, I'll stop that one. And now we'll watch another one. Okay, now here's another one. So this is the female. And here you can see she's feeding on those wings, right? So underneath the sort of larger wings, there's a second pair, and you can see her eating away at this. And then finally, I will show you, now this is a bit longer, we're not going to watch the whole thing, but if you wanted to, you could sit here and watch 6 minutes of cricket sex that involves like all kinds of weird stuff. But I mean, weird stuff in the sense that, the female is feeding on the male. But so yeah, so here we go. This is, again, the male presenting, trying to entice the female to feed on his, those specialized wings. I'll just forward. So yeah, there we go. So the female's starting to mate and then she'll hop on top. There we go. The male maneuvers. Trying to get the female to, but you can see the female and the male, they're mating. And there she goes. Now she starts going in for the snack. And all this time, the male is transferring sperm. Okay. I know it's perhaps not, it's not terribly erotic, but this is what we're dealing with. So it goes on and on. I mean, this is a 6-minute video. So there you go. this is all associated with a paper that I've put on D2L, and I'm just going to go back to my. So yeah, so this paper here is related to what we're going to talk about today. Okay, the gin trap and so on. Here's the photos and so on. So this is on D2 as well. It's worthwhile looking at that. Okay. So what's interesting is that the male has this trap that basically it's like a clamp that clamps down on the female when mating starts. And the question is, why is this the case? So here are two species that you can see the trap here. I mean, this is sort of electron microscopy of the trap. And you can see it has like these spikes that, can clamp down and grab the female. This is explained in the paper that I put on D2L, just if you want. So the question is, what is the function of this so-called gin trap? Why do males clamp onto the females? And there are a series of hypotheses. And what I'm going to do is we're going to walk through those hypotheses, and I'm going to show you the results of an experiment that was done, where the authors, Scott Sakaluk is one of them. And as it happens, the senior author, Scott Sakaluk, is down in the States, but he's actually from Northern Ontario, which is actually really interesting. So he and his team did this study where they were able to not disengage, but they were to basically render that gin trap inoperable. So they were able to prevent the gin trap from being used. So how they did that, I'm not sure. It's in the paper, but they manipulated it so that the male could not use it. And so they also experimentally removed part of the hind wing that the female would feed upon. So you've got two conditions in this experiment. And so that is that some males had part of their hind wing removed, and some males had part of had their gin trap disengaged, I guess. And some males had both taken off. That is that they had a hind wing that was removed, and they had a gin trap that was disengaged. So there are several hypotheses that were tested. The first is this one: forced copulation or coercive mating. And the idea here is that males with no hind wing, so if you were a male who had mated more than once, that means that your hind wings are depleted, if I can put it that way. Then this is a way for you to clamp onto the female and force her to mate with you, even though you don't have these, these delicious wings for her to feed upon. So she may inspect, you can imagine that you saw the behavior. So imagine that she, the male's got himself maneuvered, the female's got herself started, and then she goes in to see if she could have a meal while she's having sex. And if she finds out there isn't anything to eat, it's too late. The male is clamped onto her and he's mating with her. So that is this idea of forced copulation. So that's the hypothesis, right? So in this case, under this hypothesis, we would expect that if a male had an intact hind wing, that his mating success should be equivocal, if with or without the gin trap. The idea here is that if the female is able to feed on that hind wing, then the male wouldn't necessarily need that gin trap to hang on to it, because she's already occupied by eating, right, the hind wing. Whereas if the male did not have a hind wing, right, let's say there's nothing there for the female to eat, that's when the gin trap would be important, because the female then, when she sees, there's no food here, I'm going to leave and look for another male. It's too late. The male has clamped down with his gin trap, and he's forcing a copulation on her. Okay, so those are the predictions based on this one hypothesis. Other hypotheses, to deter opportunistic feeding. So the male will ensure that the paired female who's eating the hindwings will stick around to copulate. So that he's trying to, in this case, the hypothesis is that the male, is using the gin trap to force the female to complete reproduction, like to complete copulation, because she could sort of dine and dash, right? Like she could show up, start to mate with the male, eat what she wants, and then just leave, right? And then and leave before the male has transferred enough sperm. And so this might be a strategy to do that. In this case, regardless of whether the wings are intact or not, we would expect that males with a gin trap would have greater mating success than males that did not. Another hypothesis is to prevent usurpation. And what does that mean? That means that, another male could come along and try to knock the female off the male and mate with that female himself. So to prevent that scenario from happening, males have evolved these gin traps to hang on to the female so that she can't be knocked off by a rival male. The experimental design that I'm going to describe does not have a rival male as part of its experimental design. So it doesn't really test this hypothesis, but if that, so we would expect that, that if this is the case, then that means that mating success of males with and without the gin trap should be equal, regardless of, males that have like an intact hindwing or no hindwing should have equal mating success regardless of whether their gin trap works or not, because there's no male out, they don't have any male in the experiment trying to knock the female off. So it doesn't really test it. So everything should be equal. Finally, there's one more after this, genitalic alignment. Insect genitalia are super complex. Like literally, I'm not kidding. They are like incredibly complex in many species. And males and females have to be locked together to ensure successful copulation. And therefore, without a gin trap, the gin trap helps facilitate that. So in this case, it shouldn't matter whether the hindwings are intact or not. Males without a gin trap should have 0 mating success. And finally, mating opportunities. And this idea means that simply that males can catch nearby receptive females whenever females sort of bump into them. And they're using it as a way to latch on to females when they come by. All right, so this is the experiment, and I encourage you to read the PDF file as well. This is a pretty elegant design. You've got 22 males in each of these groups. The group with the, you've got hind wings removed and hind wings intact. You've got gin trap intact and gin trap disabled. They paired males with females, like what I just showed you, in those videos. And then they measured several aspects of mating success. And these are, proxies for reproductive success, right? So remember how I was talking about earlier about how it's really difficult to measure lifetime reproductive success as a measure of fitness. And we try to measure, fitness correlates, what they're called sometimes, or proxies of fitness. And so that's what they've done with this experiment. So they're, the time spent calling by males, mounting success and mating success being when sperm is transferred successfully. These are aspects of fitness that they're measuring. These are the various predictions that I walked you through. And here are some broad results. So the first is that there was, the wing treatment was the most statistically significant treatment. And I'm going to show you a graph in a second about this. But basically what that shows you is that males that had intact hind wings were more successful in terms of the number of mounting attempts by females than males that had their hind wings removed. So it's attractive. That speaks to the paper that I showed you there about virgin males. Virgin males are more attractive to females because they have intact wings, which means they can provide a better meal. But here's the result of the experiment. So here on the y-axis, we have the percentage of males mating. And along the x-axis, we have the males that have wings that are intact and males that do not have any, that had their wings removed. And what you can see is that there's no effect of the gin trap. So the G plus means the gin trap is active, and G minus means the gin trap is disabled. And you can see that when the wings are intact, there's no difference in the mating success of those males. And why is that? It's because the females are so busy eating the wings that they don't need the gin trap necessarily, right? The female is able to complete mating and complete the transfer of sperm simply because she's taking her, she's eating. She's got the wings are intact, and there's enough there for the female to eat for long enough that that mating will be successful. When you have males that don't have their wings, that is, this is a manipulation that's supposed to reflect what happens after males have mated once and their wings are depleted. The females have eaten them. You can see that the males with the gin trap, this is G plus here, the dark blue, those males have a much higher mating success than the males that did not have an active or that had their gin trap disabled. What does this mean? It means that the males, in this case, the females approach the males and they start to mate with them, and they start to feed on whatever's left of their wings, or they don't have any wings at all. The males will clamp onto them with their gin trap, and it suggests that this coercive mating hypothesis might be correct. Because in this case, those older males, the males that are not mated before, and that's what this is reflecting, need that gin trap in order to clamp onto the females to complete mating, because otherwise they would leave. And you can see that the males that don't have a gin trap or have a gin trap disabled have very little to zero mating success. Okay, so here we go through these different predictions, and this coercive prediction is the one, or hypothesis is the one that we are most supported by the results here. Now, the usurpation hypothesis, can we really reject it? Well, no, because this experiment didn't really test it, because it didn't include other males, right? Like, in order to test this hypothesis, you would have to look at mating success in the presence and absence of rival males, right? Are rival males able to knock the female off with and without the gin trap? That's not been tested in this experiment. So this hypothesis is still potentially valid, and you'd have to do a follow-up experiment to reject it outright. Okay. So some general points to bring to your attention. Good hypotheses are testable. That means you can imagine some result that would cause you to reject the hypothesis. So that means that you can imagine developing an experiment that will test the hypothesis. And that means that the result of the experiment can go either positively or negatively. Strong hypothesis testing, tests opposing predictions of alternative hypotheses. And this is also important. You can have alternative hypotheses, but they have to be all at the same level of analysis. And I emphasized that earlier. The level of analysis for all of the hypotheses that we've tested here are related to the adaptive significance of the behavior. We are interested in how this behavior affects the fitness of the animals that we're investigating. Right? That's the level of analysis. This is not about the mechanism behind the gin trap, right? About how the gin trap works. We haven't asked, these hypotheses are not related to, the underlying neurological, stimuli that are required to initiate the clamping down of the gin trap. Nor is this about, the ontogeny of the gin trap. When does the gin trap develop? Is it as well developed in, males that are mating for the first time, and so on? Good predictions are detailed and specific. So that is that you should be able to know whether a prediction has been upheld or not based on the experiment that you've done. So that is that you have to design an experiment that will allow you to know exactly what you're measuring. Good predictions are usually comparisons rather than absolute statements. So what that means is that we want to conduct an experiment or an observational study that compares among different scenarios rather than just looking at a single scenario and drawing conclusions from it. Okay, I'm going to end it there because that's how we're going to finish. We finished this section. And we're going to go on now to talk about genetics, heritability, and behavior. And to prepare for that, I'm going to ask you to watch, I'm going to prepare you to ask you to watch a video. I'm not going to do it now. You can do it on your own time. But if you can see, Module 2, Behavior and Genetics, under videos, there's a video here by Hopi Hoekstra.
And then we cut the mouse.
This is Hopi Hoekstra. She is, I will tell you, she is one of the most incredible evolutionary biologists out there. She's at Harvard now, but she is, I've seen her give talks at conferences, and she is amazing. And what she's done here is provide online an explanation of the genetics of behavior, and she's used some of her own work as an example. So it's about 38 minutes. I'm asking you to watch this before our next meeting on Thursday, just to give you some background before we start talking about it in this sort of, just with me talking to you with a slide deck. Okay, but this is a very important video that I want you to watch. And I think it's going to be, it's so, obviously it's important enough that I'm asking you to do it. And I'm telling you, this is something that could end up on the final exam. Right, you can Google Hopi, and I've put another video for you to watch. This is done mostly for your interest or to help you support what I'm trying to teach you in class. But there is another video that I put online, Genetics of Wild Mice Behavior. And you can feel free to watch that as well. But that introductory video, the one that I've got the 3 asterisks next to, is the one that I specifically want you to watch. Okay. Yeah, I can't tell you how great she is. She's an incredibly good communicator, and her research is like unbelievable on so many levels. And she's actually done a lot of work related to burrowing behavior in Peromyscus mice. These are Peromyscus is a genus of mice that are widespread throughout North America and parts of South America. And she has looked at the genetics underlying the burrowing behavior of these mice. And it's incredibly groundbreaking because she's identifying specific genes that are associated with this behavior. And that's that's what we're going to be talking about when it comes time to talk about genetics and behavior, because it is quite it's one thing to talk about whether the behavior of mice if that behavior is genetically based or is there a genetic component to it. But when we talk about humans, I think I alluded to this last time, it can be controversial to talk about the genetic effects on human behavior, right? So that gets into this whole realm of like whether human behavior is entirely based on our choice. Are we choosing to behave the way we do? Is there are there underlying just as, someone is tall in part because their parents are tall, are there aspects of our behavior that are related to our parents, the genes that we shared from our parents, not the environment that our parents provide for us? And so those are interesting questions. I won't get into human stuff too much at all, but the idea for next time is that we're going to talk about how, we can look at animal behavior and the heritability of animal behavior and show that it can, that there are fitness consequences to variation in animal behavior. Okay, so we'll leave it at that. I will stop recording.